Hi, and welcome back to the 50/50 Project, where every week I talk through one item on a long list of one thing I've learned for every year I have lived. This week, we've got an item that falls into what I'm calling the spiritual category. And before I launch into this category, I just want to touch back on the nature of the list, in that it's a list of things that I personally have come to believe are true and useful for me as I navigate this world. I'm not arguing that they're the right answers for everybody else, or even really anybody else. And 1,000 times moreover, I am not here to try to tell anybody else what to think about spirituality or faith or divinity or religion. What you believe or feel about all of that, as much or more than anything else in this life, is none of my business. I mean, it's endlessly fascinating to think about, but it's ultimately and rightly and only up to you. But still, there are a few things that I have come to believe that have made my spiritual life richer, I think. And a few of those are on my 50/50 list to share, without any intention of forcing others to buy into any of them. So, all that said, thing number 6. Handle your faith. What does that mean? Well, the wording here is maybe a little bit confusing at first glance, but it is important to my overall point. I'm not saying to handle faith as in manage it or wrestle it into some kind of submission and put it away in an organized fashion. I'm not saying to handle it by resolving it once and for all, neatly pinning it down or setting it in stone and checking it off the existential to-do list and never doubting it again. When I talk about handling faith, I mean getting your hands on it, pulling it down off the highest shelf or out of the dusty corner of life, carrying it over to the light, turning it over, and getting a good, hard look at these things that you believe. I mean that I think it's been important for me to tussle with it in my own mind and heart. And I'm not doing that in every moment or every time. That would be exhausting and pretty demoralizing, actually. But there have been certain moments and seasons come to me over the years that have clearly been times to reflect and to re-examine and to question my own beliefs and convictions and articles of faith. And by the way, I think this drive to question and doubt and rethink would be the case for me whether I believed in something particular, in nothing, or just in the unknowableness of it all. This is not to say that I've emerged from those inflection points with ironclad, unassailable answers. The parts of my life that fall into this category of spirituality are both incredibly important to me and stubbornly mysterious to me, even after 50 years of handling it all to the best of my ability. I was raised in the Christian tradition, but as an adult, I don't have a specific organized religion I identify with. As it turns out, probably my strongest conviction is that all of this stuff is, by its inherent nature, an extraordinary and beautiful and probably unresolvable mystery. And for me, faith seems to come alive in the act of choosing to accept the mystery itself. If I had to nutshell it, I guess I'd say I believe instinctively in the existence of something bigger than me, which is benevolent and wise, but in ways that very often surpass or elude my own understanding. Faith for me is a place that my instincts carry me to, in the same way they pull my hand off a hot burner or warn me away from the edges of high places. I go to something bigger when I'm overwhelmed with fear. I go back to something bigger when I find myself similarly overwhelmed with joy. It's a homing instinct that carries me to a place I can't even see again and again. Of all the many topic cards I have posted on my 50/50 corkboard, I think I chose this one to pull down and work on now because yesterday was actually Mother's Day. And this year, I was the exact age my mother was on her last ever Mother's Day in 1985. Yesterday, I found myself thinking a lot about how my own conceptions of faith are wrapped pretty inextricably around who she was and how she died. When I was 11 years old, if you had asked me to name the absolute worst thing that could possibly happen to me, I really think I would have said, without much thought or hesitation, losing my mom. I adored my mother. I was never happier, truly, as a kid than when I was with her. I preferred her to my friends or my cousins or other family members to a degree that was, upon reflection, probably a little oppressive to her. And then, when I was 11 years old, I lost my mom, suddenly, without warning, a few days before Thanksgiving, while I was just sitting in 6th grade math class, minding my own business. The worst possible thing that I could have imagined happening happened. Up until then, my relationship with faith had been pretty uncomplicated. I had been really lucky. I happened to grow up in a lovely, life-affirming Methodist denomination in a group of people who leaned into choir and vacation Bible school when they could have just as easily traded in fear and fire and brimstone instead. I have never had the shit kicked out of me by organized religion in the way many, many people have when they don't fit the identity checklist that their creed or congregation demands. If that has happened to you, I can only say I'm so sorry. I can only imagine how deep something like that cuts. But I had been fortunate, and I loved my church, and I had been loved there. And I still love that place and those people. But when my mother died, it started a lifelong process of fighting with my faith. I can't really express, even now, the depth of the grief I felt at that time in my life. It's hard to wrap words around the blank devastation of knowing my mother was never coming back at that age. And the rage at the senselessness of it, the obscenity of it, the absurdity of her dying when she was so terribly needed and so deeply loved, in the same plane of existence in which mass murderers were living out their lives to ripe old age. Logically, that should have pushed me over into disbelief. I find it interesting that I never stopped believing in God. I just got very deeply, almost dangerously angry with God for a really long time. I think it might have been more rational or intellectually satisfying to interpret this stunning lack of cosmic justice as a pretty strong case against intelligent design or the intercessionary divine or compassionate cosmic stewardship of whatever kind. But there was, in that time of my life, and there still remains even now, something in me, some unthinking, immutable impulse that just stretches toward that bigger thing. And it was more instinctive to me to be furious with it than to stop believing in it. This bigger thing rattling around up there somewhere, being careless or sloppy or stupid or cruel while my mother was dying down here. So my central conviction that there's something bigger than me has always survived. But a lot of my other early certainties and comforts have not. This experience brought a certain bitter but indispensable rigor to what I can bring myself to believe. Early in life, I let go of my childhood conception of God as a buffer. At 11, I could no longer believe that when you pray in the right way, you get what you want, or if you follow all the rules, you can keep yourself, or those you love more than yourself, safe. Now, that's a lot of holding forth on what I believe and why, which is not really my point. My point is what happened after. Because from then on, I've spent a lot of time with scrutiny, with questioning, with doubt. I have wrestled with the theory that belief in something bigger is in fact an instinct, but one of protective delusion, just a way that the human psyche shields itself from the terror of being helpless and mortal and imperiled. And I have to say that sometimes that makes a lot of sense to me, rationally. Beyond all of that, when I was an academic, I spent a lot of time over the years with people who champion verifiable facts over the floaty feelings of faith. And I've read lots of brilliant, earnest, logical texts on spirituality written by brilliant and earnest and logical atheists. I have listened to and thought about and really tried to make a space for other possibilities and other opinions on the beliefs that matter most to me, religious and spiritual and otherwise. Probably most of all, I've really tried to sit with myself and question my own epistemological motivations and listen to both my intellectual discernment as well as my moral conscience. I've spent a lot of my life trying to get my hands around my beliefs, pull them down off that shelf, turn them over in that light, and really think about them. It has come to feel more reverent to me now to have a well-handled faith in that way, instead of one that I leave alone in a disused corner of my life, almost as though I'm afraid it will break if I pick it up. On one hand, this process of fighting with my faith and butting heads with my beliefs has cost me. It has called me at times to step away from many sweet, precious ideas that once gave me comfort and peace. But on the other hand, it has given me its own kind of solace. Maybe I have fewer convictions and certainties to fall back on, but I'm kind of comforted to know that everything I hold to now is an examined belief. I really don't think there's anything left in the spirituality cabinet that I haven't pulled out and inventoried and tested before putting it back for keeps. It gives me some peace to know what's in there and to know, as much as a human being can, that it holds up against my own best scrutiny. This process of trying to get my hands around what I really believe has, I think, also helped me to be more respectful of the many different, wide-ranging things that other thoughtful people believe. One time I heard somebody say they respect all paths to God, and that's kind of how I feel about it too. Though I also respect those whose path doesn't lead them in that direction at all. And as I've aged up, I've grown ever more aware that the best and the worst of the people I've known are scattered wildly across a spectrum that covers all brands of belief and all schools of atheism and about 1,000 different variations on agnosticism. I know people who follow their religion as a map that leads them to lives of incredible service and self-sacrifice. And I know atheists who hold their principles of service and compassion and right and wrong absolutely sacred in their own ways, without any help from religion at all. I do know some non-believers who have no patience for people of faith, and I also know many believers who use faith as a truncheon to wield against those who don't share it, in ways that violate the very sacred principles they claim to hold dear. I know people who have been saved by things that happened for them in a church or a synagogue or a mosque. And I know those who have been broken and wronged and harmed in sacred spaces too. And for my part, I really identify with those who believe that none of us know much because it is, by design, all sort of unknowable, you know? So my point isn't about any of the personal and quite possibly wrong conclusions that I myself have reached through all this introspection and questioning, or what types of beliefs you yourself carry. What I do mean to say today is that I have found real value in the process of questioning and exploring itself. And that is especially true of the beliefs that are most sacred and most central to my life. And I think this holds regarding a lot of kinds of faith attached to many sorts of ideologies and convictions, not just ones tied specifically to spirituality or religion. I think sometimes of an acquaintance of mine, an educator, a literacy expert, who built a career around a theory of language acquisition that she really, really believed in fervently. And then at one point long-range data started coming in that cast real doubt on the efficacy of the approach she had backed. And instead of doubling down, as a lot of people in her position would, instead of going into a defensive stance, she really looked at the findings. She became convinced that she'd been wrong eventually, very publicly and for a very long time. But for her, continuing to push for the truth about the best way to build literacy was more important than the comfort of the side she had already chosen or the professional dogma she'd invested a lot of her life in, some of which she herself had actually written. At the end of the day, she wanted to find and disseminate the best ways for kids to learn reading and writing more than she wanted to stay comfortable. And even though that seems like an oddly specific anecdote, I think it's actually a really powerful, really courageous example of butting heads with a cherished belief and getting your hands around an article of faith. Okay, execution score. Given myself a 7 out of 10. 3 points off because, like many people, I've still got a lot of murky corners in the basement of my soul and other areas of my life that I don't want to go into. 7 points for earnestly believing that I should force my way in there with a flashlight anyway. And I think that's about enough for today. I hope your beliefs, whatever they are, and whether or not you feel like handling them right now, steer you well. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I'll be back soon with thing number 7.